One of the things I don't think folks understand about the flooding going on in Washington right now is we don't have emergency responses like they do down in the South for things like hurricanes. Like, occasionally a river floods and maybe like a house floats away. The news is saying this is the worst it's been in recorded history. People are not prepared for this, like at all. Entire towns are like completely underwater to the point where it's dangerous to even continue having a town there. Like you're going to have to relocate entire towns. And a lot of the people that live on these lands that are being flooded, their insurance does not cover flooding. The people that live in these areas, but no one ever expected them to flood like this. Washington's not okay right now. I am seeing so much footage all over the news and places that I recognize where I grew up that I'm never going to be the same again. The recent catastrophic flooding in Washington state is a disaster on an unprecedented scale. What people outside the region may not fully grasp is that this is not just a rare event or an unfortunate but temporary inconvenience. The flooding that is sweeping through communities right now is causing real, lasting damage that could reshape entire towns, displace families, and leave scars on the landscape for generations. What makes this even more challenging is the reality that Washington, and much of the Pacific Northwest, does not have the kind of robust emergency response systems that states in the South have in place for natural disasters like hurricanes. In places like Louisiana or Florida, where hurricanes are a regular occurrence, there's a whole infrastructure built around preparedness, response, and recovery. People know how to evacuate, where to go, and how to prepare their homes. Emergency services, government agencies, and community organizations have well-established protocols and resources to manage these events. But in Washington, especially in areas not accustomed to such severe flooding, the infrastructure is simply not in place. The severity of the flooding. The scope of the current flooding in Washington state is beyond what anyone could have predicted. News outlets are reporting that this is the worst flooding in recorded history in some areas, and the images coming out of the region are chilling. Entire towns are submerged under feet of water, with homes, businesses, and infrastructure completely overwhelmed. In some places, it's so bad that the very existence of the town is in jeopardy. The flooding is not just a temporary inconvenience or a few weeks of recovery. In some cases, these communities may never recover. Some towns may need to be relocated entirely, which is a decision no one could have imagined before it happened. The scale of this disaster has caught everyone off guard. Unlike hurricanes, which are often predicted days or even weeks in advance, flooding of this magnitude comes with little warning. It's a result of a combination of factors: heavy rains, rapid snowmelt, and rising river levels. In places like Washington, where rivers are already prone to seasonal flooding, this kind of extreme event was simply not on anyone's radar. The suddenness and severity of the floodwaters have left people scrambling to figure out how to respond. The impact on communities. For the people who live in the affected areas, the emotional and psychological toll is immense. Communities that have been established for decades, sometimes even centuries, are now underwater. Small towns where people grew up, went to school, and raised families are being washed away. For many, these towns are their entire world, and the idea that they may have to relocate is a devastating blow. The human cost is staggering. People have lost homes, livelihoods, and irreplaceable belongings. They're not just dealing with the immediate loss of their possessions, but the profound uncertainty of what the future holds. How do you rebuild a life when you don't even know if your town will exist in a year? Many people are facing the grim reality that they may never be able to return to their homes. For some, the emotional trauma of displacement will last far longer than the physical rebuilding process. Perhaps even more heartbreaking is the realization that many of these people don't have the resources to rebuild in the first place. One of the critical issues that many flood victims are facing is that their insurance does not cover flooding. In areas like Washington, where floods are not common, people typically don't have the kind of comprehensive flood insurance that would cover this kind of devastation. Even those who live in flood-prone areas may have limited coverage, and it's not always enough to rebuild a home or business after a disaster of this magnitude. Washington is not prepared for this kind of flooding disaster. While places in the South have long experience with hurricanes, Washington has historically not faced flooding of this scale. Sure, there are occasional river floods, and these tend to be more isolated events, and there's an expectation that they can be dealt with in a timely, localized way. Even the state's emergency management agencies seem to have been caught off guard by the scope of the flooding. The response has been slow, and resources are limited. Unlike the South, where people know to have a hurricane plan in place, where shelters are designated and evacuation routes are mapped, Washington does not have the same level of preparedness for flooding. And that's not to say that the people in Washington aren't resilient or capable, far from it. It's just that the resources and systems needed to handle a catastrophe of this size simply don't exist in the same way they do in hurricane-prone regions. This lack of preparation has meant that response times have been slower than necessary, and the process of evacuation and aid distribution has been chaotic. There are logistical challenges with providing shelter, food, and medical care, especially when roads and highways are impassable. Local authorities are doing their best, but they're working with limited resources and facing overwhelming circumstances. People are forced to rely on each other, their neighbors, and the larger community for help, but that can only go so far. Insurance and financial strain. One of the most devastating aspects of this flooding disaster is the financial strain it's placing on families. The majority of people in Washington state who are affected by this disaster live in what are considered floodplain areas. These are zones where flooding can happen occasionally, but historically the risk has been considered relatively low. People take out insurance, but for many that means standard homeowners policies, which do not cover flood damage. The flood insurance program in the United States is often a complicated and limited safety net. Many homeowners cannot afford the high premiums required for flood insurance, especially when they live in areas where flooding is seen as a rare or unlikely event. But as we are seeing now, when the floodwaters rise in unexpected ways, those who don't have flood insurance are left with little recourse. The cost of recovery is astronomical, and many will not have the financial means to rebuild. For many, the flood is not just a natural disaster, it's a financial catastrophe that will take years to recover from, if not longer. The long-term effects of this disaster will be felt for decades. As much as the immediate destruction is horrific, the ripple effects of this flooding will be felt for years to come. The mental health toll, the economic impact, and the displacement of entire communities will be a long-term struggle. Rebuilding efforts will take years, and some towns may never fully recover. In many cases, people who have lost everything will not be able to return to their communities. They'll have to find new homes, rebuild their lives elsewhere, and figure out how to adjust to a new way of life. The impact on local economies will also be significant. Businesses that have been in the area for generations may be wiped out, and jobs will be lost. The long-term unemployment caused by the flooding will only add to the strain. What is perhaps most frustrating for those of us in Washington who are living through this crisis is the lack of national attention. While the South is often the focus of media coverage when it comes to natural disasters like hurricanes, the flooding in Washington is not getting the same level of attention. This may be because it's not a well-known disaster zone or because people don't understand the full scope of the crisis. But the reality is that what's happening in Washington right now is no less devastating than the damage caused by major hurricanes like Katrina or Sandy. The same level of urgency, national attention, and federal aid should be directed toward this crisis as it would be for any other major natural disaster. Washington is not okay right now. Entire communities are underwater. People have lost everything. And for many, the future is uncertain. This is a disaster that demands immediate attention and action. People who have been affected by this disaster need help now, not in the distant future. Washington is in crisis, and the rest of the nation needs to recognize that and respond accordingly.